Hello, it's Clive to Carl, and I'm joined by Dr. Tom Cowan, who is a brilliant author and a brilliant speaker and outspoken, I would say, on viruses, about whether they exist, what they are, and many other topics. One of my favorite books at the moment, I was just saying to Tom, I'm recommending the Nourishing Traditions book of childcare, baby and childcare, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. And he has a couple of other books which are also great. One on vaccines and autoimmunity, and another one, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, which unfortunately I haven't actually had time to read yet. A doctor's quest to understand, treat, and prevent cardiovascular disease. So, welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming on
you.
the show.
Thank you for talking to me today.
Oh, great pleasure. I heard you speak a while back on the electric universe and the introduction of radio frequencies and what happened there, which I found extremely interesting. Where would you like to start? A little bit about your history, maybe, or?
I mean, I can start wherever you think would be best. I can tell you where I've come to about how I see medicine and science and biology. We could talk about this initiative I'm trying to put together about viruses, which I think is very exciting, actually. So that's something maybe we could talk about.
Yeah, well, let's start there. Tell us about your initiative with viruses.
All right. So, we've all been taught that there's this thing, and I say the word thing very specifically because this thing called a virus. And when I say thing, what I mean is it's not like a thought, right? Or a feeling or an idea. It is an actual physical particle, so we're told, right? That has the following characteristics. It has a certain morphology, it has a certain size. It's a protein coat with a piece of genetic material inside. All of the proteins, they say, are coded for by the genes in the genetic material. And this particle enters into cells. It's a replicating particle. And by replicating, it then destroys the cell in which it replicated and makes, untold number of copies of itself, and then goes and essentially infects and thereby causes disease in the next person, right? That's sort of a simple definition of what we're talking about. After studying this ever since HIV and then recently, I've come to the opinion, or the understanding, that's a better word, that none of that is actually accurate. There is no self-replicating particle that causes disease. That is simply a misconception. And rather, what's happening is that tissues and cells get, affected in various ways by electromagnetic fields, by starvation, by emotional issues, by mineral deficiencies. We could name hundreds of different ways that living beings are made sick. And when that happens, their tissues break down, right? As you would expect. And part of the breakdown process is the formation of these little particles, which we call viruses. So they're not self-replicating. They're not causing disease. They're not like specific entities that are organisms in themselves. They're just garbage. Just like if you blow up a house, you get little bits of paper all over the lawn, and nobody thinks that little bits of paper infected your house, reproduced, blew up your house, and therefore got on the lawn. That would be like, you would be called a lunatic if you thought that. Now, but that's what viral theory is. Now, we have said, me and others, that this is a misconception. Therefore, there's no reason to wear a mask. There's no reason to distance yourself from people. And there's no virus that's causing people to get ill. And there's certainly no reason to inject yourself with a piece of this virus, supposedly, to make yourself, quote, immune, right? So there's a lot of repercussions about this, whether I'm right or not, right? A lot. And I would also contend that not only is this the most relevant issue or an important issue, but I would say it's the most important issue, because I predicted 2 years ago that if we didn't understand that this viral theory is incorrect, we're going to do this again and again and again. And we've done it before: HIV, measles, Ebola, Zika, and then we do, there's some other ones, but then we do SARS-CoV-2, and now we're doing monkeypox, and there will be more and more. So we either get it right or we're going to do this over and over. Now, I've been strongly criticized, most importantly by other members of the so-called freedom movement. Tom is wrong, and of course there's viruses, and this is divisive, it's irrelevant, it's not scientific. We have to agree that there's viruses, but maybe we don't need to do all those other things. And I have disagreed with that. So what I've decided to do, and I'm in the early stages of this, but is, well, let me say another thing. That if you say, okay, how do you prove this? Which way is true? Either the viral theory or what I'm saying. You could say, and let me make an analogy here. If you saw that your house was breaking down, and you said, what's causing my house to decay, right? And somebody said, it's vermites. And you say, how do you know? Did you see vermites at the site of the decay? And they say, no. And you say, did you look? Yes, with a microscope, a magnifying glass. We put it under the everything. We can't see any vermites. But we found feces, which we think might be vermite feces, but it could also be flies and mosquitoes and termites and other things. So we don't really know, but we think those are vermite feces, and we're finding them. Now, most people hearing that would be very suspicious. Like, I don't think that's right. It doesn't sound right. And so here's the thing that's true. Everybody agrees, virologists, everybody. There is not one reported case in the medical literature of this thing called a pathogenic virus being found in any bodily fluid of any sick person ever. Not measles, not smallpox, not HIV, not SARS-CoV-2, not Ebola, not monkeypox. They simply cannot find this virus in any fluid or tissue of any sick person, which is extremely weird, because aren't we told that this thing replicates and makes teeming with viruses, yet they can't find them. And since they can't find them, and they can't isolate them in the sense of separating it from everything else, they can't purify it. Therefore, they don't know which material they're looking at, like which genetic material or which proteins came from this so-called virus, or whether it came from you or the bacteria that live in you or the fungus or anything else, right? And so, and if you can't find it and you can't isolate it and you can't purify it and you can't characterize it, you certainly can't expose an animal to it and see if it makes them sick because you don't have it. So, and they all admit that that's true. They haven't done that and never have done that. So here's what they say. They say, we take like snot from a person we say has COVID. We put that in a cell culture, right? These are monkey kidney cells. And this is not a virus they put in. It's just lung fluid. We add antibiotics, we take away the nutrients, we grow it for 7-10 days, or so-called grow it, and then the cells break down, and that to us says the proof that that is a virus. And they call that process isolation. Then they say, see, we see these little pictures on the electron microscope coming from this cell culture, and they say those are the virus, even though you see hundreds of other little particles in there, which are apparently not the virus. And then they say we can sequence the genome in there, but they don't actually find the genome. They find, 23 million little pieces, and they assemble those together in this complicated way and make a genome. So they never have the actual genome. It's assembled, not sequenced. And that is the proof of, those are the three pillars of virology. Now, for 2 years, we've said, show us the virus in the tissue, isolate it, purify it, show that it caused disease, and they say they can't do that. So we're stuck. So what I've decided to do is say, okay, we'll meet you halfway. Let's see if your way works. So here's what we're going to propose. You take 2 people with COVID, you say has COVID, 2 people who don't have COVID, totally well people. Take their snot, do all your experiments, and show us that all 20 of those people who you say have COVID have the same genome. And the 2 people without, they don't have any genome. Right? That should be how it works. They don't have any variants. It's the same person, same sample, same virus. They should grow it, purify, characterize it like they do, and all 20 blinded labs should have the same genome. They then should, if we give them samples of well people with lung cancer, people with influenza A, people with COVID, do the same thing, show us the cytopathic effect, show us the electron microscope pictures, show us that they all have the same genome. Because there's no published study that does that. If they can do that, then we will say that is step 1 in proving that your techniques work. I can 100% guarantee you that they can't do that. Now, what I want to do is to get everybody who, that would be doing science, right? Show me that your technique, 20 samples, same sample, divided 20 labs, they don't know each other. They don't know whether it's a sample or not, from a sick person. Show us the genome, and they should all be identical. I want to get everybody involved in the freedom movement to agree and sign, we want to see this experiment. That will put this debate to rest. I don't want to have a debate where they say their facts and we say ours, and they come up with one-liners and we come up with our one-liners, and we call each other idiots and all that. Let's do the science and we'll live with the results. And if you're against doing that, that means you don't want to know. And you're not willing to say they can't come up with the same genome every time. In other words, not reproducible, which means not science. And it will be very interesting to see whether the virologists take it up, and whether I could name, 50 people who in this so-called freedom movement, who are writing things and making movies, and yet my guess is they won't sign it because they don't want to know.
What would you imagine would be the cost of doing that science?
We'll pay for it. I know how to, not much. Because
$100,000 or $10,000 or
$100,000.
Okay.
So we're talking about, they spend what, $5 trillion a year on doing virology research. Let's say it's $500,000 to do a culture and show the electron microscope pictures and then sequence it, which is not sequencing. That's like for a mechanic changing the oil in your car. They do that all the time. They should. And one of the reasons we are doing this is one of the members of our group. So they say we did this culture and we did a mock experiment, which is what they mean is a control. And they don't publish how they did the mock experiment, right? They don't say we did this and we did this. So finally, we got an answer from one of them. And it turns out they didn't add the antibiotics. They only added it to the actual experiment. And they didn't take away the nutrients. And that's not a control. There's 3 different variables. Well, more than 3. They fed it different. They added different poisons. One, they put unpurified snot in, which has hundreds of components, right? Proteins and minerals and you name it, right? They didn't add a virus. And the other, they added snot, added lots of antibiotics, took away the nutrients, and then it broke down. So that's not science. That's, I don't know what it is. It's not science. So all we're saying is, okay, if you say that is the way to do it, all of you people on both sides, show us that it actually works. They can't do it. After 70 years of doing this, they refuse to do those studies.
I've always wondered what virologists do during their working day, because virologists have been around for however many decades, right? I'm thinking of people like Judy Mikovits or whoever. This is their profession. Can they really have been fooling themselves for decades that something doesn't exist? I mean, how do they deal with that in their minds, in their day-to-day work? Are they blind? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Here's one way to answer that question. I had a longtime friend who wrote a paper on the difference between the immunological profile of a vaccinated person versus somebody who was exposed to the virus, right? So that's an interesting thing. So I read the reference of the paper that was exposed to the virus. So here is the virus. So this is a way of answering your question. Here is the virus. They took snot from a person they said had COVID. They put it in a cell culture. They added amphotericin, it's an antibiotic, a gentamicin, very toxic antibiotic. put a bunch of fetal calf syrup in there. That's serum withdrawn from the heart of a fetal, calf, an in utero calf. Put a bunch of nutrients in there, took them away, and then the thing broke down, and they squirted that up the person's nose, and they called that a virus. That's like if you go to a Indian restaurant and you go home and somebody says, "What did you eat?" And you say, "I had turmeric." And the guy says, "That's it?" Well, it had chicken and pasta and, curry and cauliflower. Why didn't you say you ate chicken curry with turmeric in it? Well, because it had turmeric in it. But nobody talks like that, right? We don't say I had turmeric, but they said that's a virus. So I wrote to her and said, why didn't you say you were comparing people who were injected with God knows what to people who you squirted this cell culture with God knows what in it up their nose, right? That would be an accurate description. It's not a virus. And she said, well, we did this entire paper, 20-page paper, 250 references, under the assumption that the virus is real. And there was a virus in that sample. Now, I said, because I'm a smartass, well, I decided that I'm assuming I can fly, so I decided I was going to go find a tall building and jump off. Right? The assumption is everything. You assume there's a virus in there, and she wasn't willing to look at that issue. In which case, every analysis subsequent to that is irrelevant. Right? Because all you can say is people exposed to a cell culture squirted under high pressure up their nose have different antibodies and chemicals in their blood and tissues than somebody who you injected with a bunch of poison. Right? I already know that. Right? You're going to get different results. That's nothing to do, it has nothing to say about immunology, viruses, or anything else. And every single bit of information is irrelevant after that. Now, that's the answer to your question. They start with the assumption that there's this virus, never mind how we proved it. And then they do all this fancy analysis. Oh, we found this protein and this bit of DNA, and it looks like that DNA, and this protein matches to this bit of DNA, and that antibody matches to this bit of protein. And then they say, we have 3 independent ways of showing there's a virus: the sequence, the protein, and the antibody. Now, it turns out you don't know where that sequence came from. You don't know whether it's from you. In fact, 98.5% of the genome of SARS-CoV-2 has now been proven to come from human airway cells, right? So it's you breaking down into these little bits of stuff. So, but they say that's one independent proof. We have this genome. Now, the genome matches with the protein. So, of course, you get a protein matching to the genome. And so they call that independent proof too. And then the antibody matches to the protein, right? And they say we have an antibody. So that's independent proof 3. But it's not independent. It's dependent on the protein, which is dependent on the sequence, which you don't know where the hell that came from. And this virologist's job is to dissect the protein. That's all he does. So he does an X-ray crystallography, he does a three-dimensional model, he does a sequence of the amino acids and which element is part of the amino acid sequence, and writes papers about it. And if you say to him, how do you know that protein, came from the virus? Well, it matches the DNA. Well, how do you know the DNA came from the virus? Well, because somebody showed it. We assumed that it was a virus. In which case, if I assume I can fly, I can jump off a building. And if I'm wrong, then I'm dead. And nobody calls them on this. And they make their living studying the protein. And if you say, prove the first step, they won't do it. We're about to see whether they'll do
it. Are they criminal or are they just criminally stupid?
So I try my best not to talk about other people's motivation. But so I don't know. It's a complex thing when your whole, you see, and this is the problem with telling people what I just said. So what happens is people say, I think, to themselves, so you mean everything I've been told about this is wrong? Yes. That means people are like lying to me or are really stupid. Yes. Is this the only thing in the world that they're lying or stupid about? I don't know. You decide. If that's not true, what else are they lying or stupid about? Like economics, wars, climate change, spraying in the air. I could go on. Whether plasma rays exist, right? Ether, whether that exists. You know a lot about these things. They say they don't exist. Maybe they're wrong. In which case, I'm going to have to get like new friends. And I can't, like, if I say this to people, they say, we're going to, there's a huge social cost to stepping out of this matrix. New family, new friends, new job, new economics, new self-conception. I'm not doing that. I'd rather be dead. So they do. That's why. I don't know whether it's like a cult, which is why I wrote a book called Breaking the Spell. It's like the people are under a spell, and they know the cost of getting out of the cult. Just like any cult, you get out of the cult and they make your life miserable. But if you stay in the cult, all cults lead to one place, and that's suicide.
Is that true, that last bit? Is that always the way? I'm not sure.
Eventually. Yeah, I'm not sure either. We can retract that. But suicide, maybe physically, maybe metaphorically. You've cut yourself off from what a human being is and does, which is use your thinking and your understanding to wend your way through the world, right? How do I see the world? And you end up in a situation where there's something in me that says, see the world this way, that this isn't right what I'm seeing. But I'm going to ignore that because the cost of doing that means they kick me out into the wilderness and a lion's going to eat me. I'd rather be part of the tribe, and that is a spiritual death, sometimes followed by real death. So that's a good clarification.
So I've spoken to lots of people over the last 2 or 3 years about, okay, well, if a virus isn't a virus, what is it? I've spoken to Dr. Andrew Kaufman, and we've spoken about exosomes and so on. And we've spoken about resonance and why people do seem to get the same issue that the person they're living with or the child brings the virus back home from school. I imagine by now you've been asked these sort of questions so many times, you've got a very good explanation as to what actually they are detecting. I mean, presumably, as you say, it's particles of somebody's body breaking down. But let's talk about, the transmission, because, everybody's had this thing where little Jimmy's come home from school and suddenly the whole family's got a cold or something. Can you explain the mechanism there as to what's happening?
If I can I give you like a slightly long-winded explanation?
Please.
Can I also share my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to start with a quote from a British biologist, Harold Hillman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So during a research career of 50 years, I've concluded the following are unsuitable for studying the biology of living cells in intact animals and plants: subcellular fractionation, histology, histochemistry, electron microscopy, binding studies, ligands, and you can see all the rest of it. And you can see his objections. These are all the techniques that we use in modern study of virology and modern cellular biology. So his point, and I would not like to get in an argument with Harold Hillman about biology, is that they're unsuitable for studying living systems. So to answer your question, what is transmission based on? We have to understand what the system that we're dealing with. And what do I mean by that? So let me show you this. Not this.
Nice star thought. Nice star thought there.
Yeah. This is my favorite quote. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. That's Mark Twain.
He was just brilliant, Mark Twain.
Yeah. So I have a whole bunch of stuff on virology, but I'm just going to skip that and go to this. So we're told this is what a cell is. It's got all these components: a membrane, a nucleus, microtubules, ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria, on and on and on, Golgi vesicles. All of these were found in the ways that Hillman described. None of them can you see in any kind of light or dark field microscope. And if you take one in particular, ribosome, which is important in the whole RNA becomes protein supposedly on this ribosome, you notice that every ribosome is a perfect circle on an electron microscope. Therefore, it must have been a perfect sphere in real life. And if you realize that that this tissue sample was fractionated, I mean, it was ground in a blender and frozen to 120 degrees and shot with an electron beam. It's like, what are the chances that if you had an orange and you put it in a blender, every piece would be a perfect sphere? And the answer is 0. And what that means is this thing doesn't exist. It's an artifact. And there is no thing called a ribosome. interesting, the word ribosome means rib from the body, which is a biblical expression, to put it mildly. And you can go through with each one of these and prove they don't exist. Now, here's what does exist. This is an actual picture of a living cell, and you see a thin cell membrane. You see a spherical dome-shaped nucleus. You see little mitochondria, and it's embedded in structured or coherent or gelatinous or easy or a lot of different coherent water, right? You with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the system we're actually dealing with is not that complex nonsense that we're told. It's essentially an antenna, which is a spiral, and that's the shape of moving water. It's not the DNA like we're told. The DNA is just a chemical that fills in the matrix of this spiral. And that antenna, this spiral, it is embedded in the nucleus, which is a dome, right? And that is embedded in the cytoplasm, which is water, structured water. And that's all there is. So the system is the tissues, living systems, essentially collect electromagnetic fields from the sun and the earth and the moon and the planets, and thoughts and feelings and and vibrations and sound and plasma and the ether, and downloads that into the nucleus, which acts as an amplifier. And that gets through probably through actin, which are tubular proteins, that gets downloaded into the cytoplasm, and that makes the structures that we call you. If there's any problem in that system, in other words, abnormal electromagnetic fields or resonance signals that you're sick, that will get downloaded and it will create abnormal structures in the tissues. Right? You with me?
Yep.
So that's the theory here. Now, here's a picture of the ribosomes. You can see all these circular, these are electron microscope pictures. You can see them lining the endoplasmic reticulum. We know that these are artifacts. Say, here's another one. Now, interestingly, the question is, can water do this? And I would say we could actually, and what this is it can take energy from, let's just say the field or the ether or the plasma, and create form out of that, create structure, right? That's the question. There's no code, there's no DNA, RNA code. It's just antenna, amplifier, capacitor into the water, make physical structure. So here's a woman who takes water, and shows it different images and puts it in the freezer and says, make the image, right? So we're sort of recreating that system, but now in a petri dish. So she asked she showed the water a wedding invitation and asked the water to show her the wedding invitation, and the water did this. That looks like a wedding ring.
Wow.
Now, you could say, why didn't the water sing, "Here Comes the Bride," right? Because that would be a wedding. But the water doesn't have a voice box. It just has crystals. So it's using what it has. And then I'll show you one more of these. This is my favorite one, especially for anybody in England. So here's the question for the water. What is falling down? Do you know the answer to that?
Rain.
Right. You could think of a whole lot of things, rain, whatever. But here I would say is the actual best answer. Right? Everybody knows London Bridge is falling down.
Wow.
Right? So that's the intelligence and creativity of water.
So this
Now,
is clearly very different to Dr. Emoto's sort of system.
yeah, it's similar.
Okay.
She sort of modified his technique. Now, I'm going to finish with this. There's a whole lot of other slides. So let me just reiterate the system that we're dealing with, which is antenna, right? That's spiral water with DNA sort of as the chemical matrix. Embedded in a spherical dome-shaped nucleus with tubes holding up the nucleus essentially, or connecting the nucleus to the cytoplasm, and that's water, right? You with me?
Yeah, I think so.
So take a look at that. Whoops. Whoop, that one. You know what that is?
The Taj Mahal.
So look at the system. Antenna, right? Dome-shaped amplifier, columns into the water. The question is, what did they know? How did they build this? Here's another one, the Vatican. Antenna, dome, capacitors, water. Same, St. Petersburg, you don't see the water, but it's down there. And here's another one, Turkmenistan, you can see the water, they knocked off the antennas.
Yeah.
So once you understand the system and you understand that, let's say, chickenpox. So chickenpox is a situation where there's something happened and the system isn't functioning properly, like there's been nutritional deficiencies or problems in the family, or not enough collagen or not enough minerals, or something like that, right? Something happened. And you, the child, knows you need to reorganize yourself to be a better version, right? So you have to essentially dissolve the gel, excrete it, so you can make a more perfect union, they say, right? That's what we call being sick. And it always goes in that order. Increase the temperature, dissolve the gel, mucus, flush it out, reconstitute a perfect pool of water. Now, the signal for that comes through the antenna. And somebody else does it, and then you receive the signal. Now it's okay to do that process because fundamentally it's a therapeutic, cleansing, healing strategy. And I can perfectly understand, just like, the theory that the only thing humans can communicate between each other is viruses. Like, I don't think that's right. Like, I can communicate sound and experience, and you could even feel the communication between people, right? You go into a room, you can feel the energy, you can feel whether there's a sadness or whatever. You can feel lots of things. That's because we are organized to download this information from the quote field and use that as information to say what we need to do next. And it could be that you need to cleanse or not, and that's where the transmission comes from. It could also come from, two people in the same house both have the same deficiency, or the same, they put wallpaper up with arsenic in it, which actually happened, or they were both afraid, or their parents were getting divorced, or there's lots of possibilities or combinations. But the transmission is what we all know. You see, the problem with science is they've convinced us to disregard things that we actually know are true, right? We know there's electromagnetic field transmission between living beings. Kittens stick their tail up, which is their antenna. And I've seen it myself. They can see, but they can't possibly see a mouse like half a mile away. And they go right towards it. They can't see or hear it, or they just felt it. So that's how it works. And they have an antenna, and they download information, and then they go meow, and they go right. And birds could do that 2,000 miles, fly in a beeline, through hay bales practically, because they feel the field. And that's, they have antennas and circular, things in their ears and all that stuff to facilitate, to make this reception more specific and more sensitive. It's similar to a radio. And it gets into your question, are these people corrupt or stupid? They have a theory that, a radio works the same way. You have an antenna and it downloads information into the transistors or whatever's in there, and that creates sound, just like we create a structure. And the modern science, biology, and medicine is the quest to find the origin of the sound within the radio. It's not there. They can dissect it to the atom, and that's what they're doing. They're dissecting it to the atom. It's got to be in there somewhere. And if you say it's not in there, they get rid of you. So you just agree it's got to be in there.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, it's not in there. It doesn't matter how many times or how much money or how minute you look, but it has to work, right? It has to be a actual, well put together transistor radio. And if it isn't, you got to break it down and put in a new part. That's called sickness. And that's all there is to sickness. You got a bad radio because the parts are wrong. I know you're interested in minerals, so you don't have magnesium. You can't build a radio without magnesium. Like, why is that so complicated? You can't build a radio without copper wires, I think. I don't know if radios, they had some kind of wire in there. Right? Doesn't work.
Well, quite. It must have been, I don't know, 30 years ago or more that I noticed something about viruses that really struck me strongly. So many people told me the same story, that they'd been overworking and they were really tired, and they decided finally after a long time to take a holiday. And they said the same story. I kept hearing it. I sat down in the seat of the airplane and we took off, and then the next thing I'd got a cold.
Yeah.
And they said it was the air conditioning in the plane. And I heard it so many times I didn't believe that. I completely believe that their body, like somebody can wait to die,
Yeah.
They can wait until the family's all gone and then they die.
Yeah.
I believe that a detoxification happens when you can finally relax. And the moment you see
Yeah,
something playing, you go, oh, I can relax now. And the body goes, whoopee, let's get all that snot out.
exactly. Because the fundamental shift in thinking is that thing we call a cold is a therapeutic response. And as soon as you see that, everything changes. You know, here's another question. One of the first things I thought of. So supposedly you got these viruses, they're all different, independent. You know, there's a measles and a chickenpox and a mumps virus, right? So I used to ask people and myself the question. So they're independent, right? There's you got measles. How many people do you know who've had chickenpox, measles, or mumps in their life? Like lots, right?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Thousands, or heard of them. Next question. How many had all three at the same time?
None, as far as I know.
None. Why not? They're just three viruses. You mean nobody in the history of the world happened to encounter three viruses at the same time? Like they're all over the place, supposedly, before vaccination, right? So you could be around somebody with measles and chicken pox, and why not at the same time? There's no report in the medical literature of any human being having two, chicken pox and measles at the same time. You mean nobody encountered those two viruses at the same time? Like, why is that? That can't be. The reason is because they're not actually illnesses, and your body doesn't want to do, this type of detoxification and this at the same time. So it just does one, and then maybe it does another one later. And so it changes the whole picture of this. And there can't be any other explanation except nobody ever encountered two viruses at the same time, which is totally ridiculous. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, my cat's going mental, wants feeding, and it's knocking things over to get my attention.
Yeah.
Yes, super interesting. So, um, let's say there's a mother right now and they've got a child with chicken pox. The sort of things I'd be suggesting would be vitamin C as a very first place to start. What would you say to somebody's just rang you up? My child's got chicken pox. Uh, what what's happening and what should I do? What would you say?
I'd say good. Just stay home and and sing and go outside in the sun if it's a nice day. Put your feet on the earth. You could take vitamin C. You could do homeopathic medicines. But this is a completely benign, healthy situation. And I've never once, out of thousands of cases of chickenpox, never once saw a bad outcome. And I never did anything about it.
Certainly, when I was young, there were chickenpox parties and measles parties and everything.
Yeah,
And measles, as I understood it, was meant to be a sign of growing up. That
yeah,
parents would say, well, actually, it matured the child.
yes, it's a maturation step. You need a slightly newer upgrade in your radio. So you got to break the old one down a little bit and build a new radio.
And so when loads of children have chickenpox at the same time, it is resonance the reason? Can you explain that part as to why it happens to several people at once?
There's either a common, influence, like they're all eating the same thing or they all put wallpaper or something. That could be, and it's also could be many things. But when you're talking about a more sort of universal phenomenon, the thing is, these childhood illnesses they come for a certain like 50 years and then they go away by themselves. Nothing to do with vaccines. And so there's something like in the water or in the sewage or in the electromagnetic field or even in the consciousness of the people. Like they're going through a certain, transition of the way they see the world or think, and they go through these kind of detoxification processes. So that's what's happening in those cases. Again, it only makes sense when you understand the system, which is we download information from the world and into our water, which is our structure, and we create a living being out of that. And either the water is wrong, not enough minerals, not enough vitamins, you're not eating the right food or something, or the information is wrong that introduced, radio antennas or 5G to your village. Everybody gets chickenpox because the information is wrong. So it's like now they put a new radio tower and your radio is tuned to 98.6, but this one is 98.8, and all you get is static. So until you can retune it, you're going to get symptoms. That's what we call disease. It's a reconfiguring of our physical structure.
So I used to get colds or flu or whatever it was 3 times a year, maybe. And then about 15 years ago, I discovered vitamin D, and that was like an immediate trigger, and I didn't get colds after that. Would you say that if somebody is looking after themselves, making sure they've got the nutrients that they need one way or another, that they should be bulletproof against what are called viruses?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, because it's like when people say, I don't have any toxic influences in my life. You can't be right.
People breathe, don't they?
I say, have you ever looked up in the sky? So I looked up this morning and there was 12 different chemtrails right above my house, all of which have been shown to be putting out all kinds of toxic chemicals raining down on me. So for me to say I don't have any exposure to anything untoward is ludicrous. I mean, there's glyphosate everywhere. And I'm more and more thinking the worst toxic influences are like delusions. It's not good to believe lies. It makes you sick. And we all, everything in politics and economics in the news, it's all lies. So we're all exposed to that. So, vitamin D, I'm not a big fan of, say, vitamins per se, but I'm a big fan of being in the sun.
Quite. Unfortunately, in England in the winter, there just isn't enough.
Right. So
it made a massive difference in my life. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
That one thing.
Yeah. So that's a way of doing that. Or you can eat lard from pigs that were out in the sun or things like that. So yeah, you don't want to be starving. And that includes starving of nutrients and minerals and proteins and love and connection. And you don't want to be poisoned, and that includes all kinds of things. And if you are, your body will make an adjustment, and we call that sickness. That's all there is to it.
I think, I spoke to Ilana Freeland yesterday, and
All right.
she was talking about, she reckons there are seven different things that are going on with the chemtrails separately. Yeah. And I wonder if one of them could be, clearly light carries information, sunlight carries information. Yeah. that are they actually deliberately blocking information from us, as well as poisoning us and everything else?
Yeah. I mean, right. That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if it's deliberate or, but they say they're trying to keep, the sunlight out, right? That's the whole point because of, so-called climate change. And that is information.
Well, if a cosmic change is happening at this time, then it may be the information that the sun puts out is going to change.
Yeah, right.
And they, so to speak, might know this.
They might know.
Esoteric stuff.
They just might. And so then we can't adapt like we are meant to adapt. That's the beauty of having water as our structure instead of quartz. Water is infinitely adaptive. You put a new signal in, it changes configuration. It's the only substance that makes a crystalline structure that's, transformable that I know.
Yes, quite. Yes. And the human being is the most incredible thing. Absolutely incredible. I don't know about you, but increasingly I've allowed myself in work, life, to use my intuition more and more and more as I find that, it's I don't understand. Well, basically, we do know if we can interpret our intuition properly, then the moment you meet somebody, you know exactly who they are.
Yes.
Even on the phone.
Yes. Exactly. We are always picking up these energy signals. That's what a human, and when you stop believing stuff and start knowing stuff, there's a difference. These guys or people believe in viruses. They have no idea how they came up with that. But I don't think we should really believe in anything, because you can know, I know, like, my reaction to this person. That's a whole different thing. Like, I don't think native people believe they could talk to trees or get information from trees. They heard the tree any more than I believe I'm sitting in a chair. I don't believe I'm sitting in a chair. I'm sitting in a chair. How do I know? Because I was a chair and I'm sitting in it. And that's a whole different level of life. And people now, they just go, they believe. And so if you believe stuff, you'll believe what the next person tells you, or the next person, or the next person. And you have no idea whether any of it's true or not.
It's interesting you say that. About 12, 14 years ago, I suddenly had this realization that the biggest mistake that I was making, or the biggest learning that I was getting, was I was making assumptions about stuff.
Yeah.
And I put a post-it note on the mirror saying, "Are you sure what you're thinking is true, or is it an assumption?" And I really had to get that lesson into myself, because I was assuming stuff, and life was worse because I was generally assuming the worst.
Yes. If you assume you can fly, it's okay to jump off a building. And if you go from knowing and your observation, which is, I don't think I can fly, you don't do stuff like that. All these assumptions lead you to eventually do stuff that's sort of bad for you, because it's just, you're living, it's not true.
Well, quite. So let's come back to where we started with this initiative. What do you need people to do to help you achieve this?
So we're going to write it up, make sure we have the experiments airtight. So here's what we're asking you to do. Here's what will prove that your techniques are valid. And we'll get input from our critics, up to a point, and then we really expect that anybody who claims they're scientific or wants to use logic and reason and rational thinking, there's no reason why they shouldn't agree to do this.
Why not raise the money? Raise 100,000 isn't going to be that difficult, and don't wait for somebody else to do it, but just do it.
Yeah, we will. The thing is, we have to get 20 virology labs to do it.
Ah, yes, that's an interesting conundrum, isn't it?
Right. It may be, and it's that they won't do it. In which case, that's also, why would you not want to do that? Why don't we all want to know? So let's just find out. We don't need a verbal debate. We need to do the science. Then we'll know.
And how long would it take to do the science?
A few months.
Okay.
It's a few weeks if everybody started tomorrow.
Okay, so what needs to happen for it to start tomorrow?
We need to formalize the proposal.
Okay, how long would that take?
That depends on me.
Okay, I repeat my question. How long would it take? Give
We'll
yourself
see.
as much time as you need.
Yeah, I have to get it. We have to get it right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's very exciting because we need positive initiatives right now. That everybody is beginning to understand what the problems are, but I hear so few people coming up with solutions.
Yes.
And solutions, actually, I mean, every problem in the world's already been worked out. People have been talking
The
about
solutions are obvious once you understand
why.
and this is an obvious first step. Let's put this to bed. Then we can go about finding out, what we're made of and why we get sick. And then you can not have that happen.
Brilliant. Now, I do want to plug your books. Which, if they were to buy one of your books or two, what are the highlights in your opinion?
I think that the best ones, frankly, for me, are the Human Heart, Cosmic Heart has 2 points. The heart is not a pump. Blocked arteries don't cause heart attacks. Then there's the cancer book. We're made of water. Cancer is not a genetic disease. It has nothing to do with genetics. Then there's Breaking the Spell. Here's why there's no viruses. Here's this system that I talked about. There you can see all what to do and all the reason we get sick just based on applying that system. Then you're done.
Well, very good. The other one I want to mention, I know you think it's a bit out of date, but I love the book you did with Sally Fallon on how to have healthy children.
Yeah. Great.
Well, brilliant. I know we could talk for hours, but I don't want to tie you up anymore. Is there anything else that we should discuss, or?
I think we're good.
I think so. That was fantastically interesting. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you, Clive.